Good morning and welcome to the December 2009 Broadband Breakfast Club. We are very grateful for your attendance here today. Please feel free to continue to enjoy your breakfast and get your breakfast. While we get started, we have a big program today, and so we'd like to go ahead and introduce our first welcoming speaker. My name is Drew Clark, and I'm the editor and executive director of Broadband Census. We've actually, for those of you who follow us closely, just launched a new website, broadbandbreakfast.com, which features and highlights our news activities. We're a news company, produce events, and we also produce data about local broadband speeds, prices, availability, reliability, and competition. And that's, of course, at broadbandcensus.com. And more information is on your seats about that. But I would like for you to turn with me to your program on today's subject, which is setting the table for the National Broadband Plan, Bridging the Digital Divide. And we're very blessed to have some great speakers. I'll introduce our welcoming speaker in just a moment, but I do want to first off thank our sponsors. We want to welcome our newest sponsor, the Telecommunications Industry Association, as well as the rest of our sponsors for their support, the International Broadband Electric Communications, Inc., the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, and the Benton Foundation. Please join me in thanking our sponsors. Now I'd like to say just a few remarks about the Honorable Diane Watson. She is the representative for the Central District in Los Angeles, 33rd Congressional Districts, including Culver City, LA, and portions of LA County. She's also a former ambassador to the Federated States of Micronesia, and she serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And she's very engaged in issues pertaining to international relations and technology. Before serving in Congress, Congresswoman Watson was, for 17 years, the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee of the California Senate. And so she has extensive experience with dealing with health care disparities. And she appreciates the importance of the role that technology can play in bridging the digital divide. So we're very happy to welcome the Honorable Diane Watson.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. It gives me great pleasure to be with you this morning, and as you heard, I represent a large area in LA County. As I travel abroad, I say I represent Los Angeles and Culver City, but when I say Hollywood, I get the smiles on everyone's face. So we are, as a media center, very, very crucial to the state of California and particularly LA County. So I'm thrilled that your organization is really focusing on broadband, and you're doing us a tremendous national service by regularly convening a broad base of stakeholders and experts from both the public and private sectors to share your perspectives, create a valuable resource archive for decision makers, and boy, do we need it as decision makers at this time, and dealing with the multiple complex and interrelated issues relating to broadband and the exploration of them. So thank you for that service. As a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and a former ambassador, I'm fully aware of how every aspect of life in nations around the globe has been altered by the interactive technologies and by the accelerated pace of technological change. And increasingly, technologies have positioned societies on a threshold between what Alvin Toffler called the second and third wave of civilization. I was ambassador to the Federated States of Micronesia, many people don't even know where they are. So in my preparation for going, I had a balloon, a global balloon, that I would keep in my living room. And when relatives would come over and say, now, where are you going? I'd bounce it over to them and do a geography lesson. I'm saying that because it takes 39 hours to get there. 1,000 miles below Guam, in the North Pacific, 6 degrees above the equator. And the significance of that is that it's very isolated. And the reason why we're out there with an embassy is because we had a compact with that area after the Second World War of strategic denial, so we could use those waters if there were troubles in that area. So speaking of isolation, we were. And the time that I went over, the sophistication of technology didn't quite fit. It wasn't an overlay. So I hope not to go back to that area, but I hope to eventually go into another area, maybe in the Caribbean, where broadband is essential. In America, President Obama has begun to address these grand challenges wrought by technologies by issuing a call for all America to lead the way in bringing the entire world online. And he asked that we become innovative about expanding access to the internet and to make the World Wide Web a reality rather than merely a name. And in the largest state of the Union, California, 38 million people, growing by 2,000 a day with, and this is a mind blower, not all of our immigrants come from over the southern border. They come, the majority, from across the Pacific. And so we're very sensitive. We're really 3 states in one, and even climate-wise. And so technology leads the way, and many of our, those who were secretaries of education committed back in the 70s to putting high technology in every classroom for the use of our students. So the president, in that light, understands that eyeballs are the key to unlocking solutions to vast challenges that are here now and that are to come in the future. The more eyeballs which can go online, take in information, question assumptions, add data, correct errors, and give feedback on the world problems in shelter, nourishment, healthcare, energy, environment, education, government operations, economic opportunity, and public policy, the more the world will prosper and the more Americans can reap the benefits of living in a world of abundance. And, you know, our young people have grown up in this technological age. They have found ways to use Facebook in ways that we never thought of 10 years ago. And so they're really up on this. I grew up in a time where you only had the radio, and we used to get around it. Now these kids have instant input and do instant output. And we can use it for very, shall I say, for educational purposes and keep them involved, but also it can be used in a very negative way. Just a couple of weeks ago, it was announced on the floor of Congress that someone had hacked in to the Ethics Committee file. And so, you know, there are ways of picking up information that should be private at the fingertips. So as we look at high technology, we also have to look at its security. And so broadband is a priority for this new era in the White House. And not only has our president called for a national broadband strategy that addresses innovation and economic growth and job creation for years to come, but he's established a chief technology officer in the White House. What a concept. And it's Anish Chopra, and I think some of you are familiar with him, and hired an FCC commissioner and rural broadband expert at the USDA. and made broadband a key component of his economic stimulus program. Now, in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and I'm going to go quickly because I'm not the keynote speaker. I'm just to introduce the subject. But anyway, our stimulus plan, the President called on the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, to create a comprehensive national strategy that will establish a worldwide broadband platform for across the American. And the objective is to provide high-speed internet access and broadband capability to every American. To that end, the FCC will establish benchmarks for meeting that goal. And the fundamental goal is the design of an internet ecosystem that is not only appropriate to the global age, but also is reflective of our democratic values. In essence, any national broadband plan must stimulate access to and adoption and use of advanced broadband connections in all of our communities across the country. If we want American prosperity, we must not only extend our geographic reach and capacity of broadband networks to all Americans regardless of age, gender, income, race, ethnicity, religion, political orientation, and disability. We must also ensure that there is access to digital literacy programs that promote effective use of these technologies, and our young people are ready. But unfortunately, research indicates that America suffers from the digital divide. The significant disparities which exist in access to computers and broadband hurt because they reduce our competitiveness. Smaller nations and nations with less of a gap between the wealthiest and the poorest, and nations with command economies excuse me, with command economies can have a larger percentage of their populations productively online than America. Problems in all affordability and training can and must be solved through digital literacy programs. And studies consistently indicate that these disparities across demographic groups are tied directly to social economic levels, geography, and race. There are areas in my district that suffer greatly. They're in the southern part of my 33rd district, and prosperity is north of Wilshire Boulevard, if you know Los Angeles, and wealthier communities have access. And so we really have to level the playing field. Eliminating this digital divide is critical to meeting our nation's goals and those of our citizenry. In the past 2 years, I promoted an innovative agenda, and I want to introduce my staff, Ronnie Lowenstein, who's got the feet on the ground, the boots on the ground, so to say, and goes across the country and works with a couple of schools, and they just happen to be my alma maters, and in crossing that digital divide. Specifically, we've introduced 2 best practice programs that rely on broadband to create 21st century environments for teaching and for learning. Both programs use a state-of-the-art technology to link students and educators to each other and to the real world. Both programs are committed to cultivating our youth as emerging leaders of a global society. So broadband is enabling our community to build bridges of understanding in an increasing world without borders. So in 2008, the initial program was designed as a demonstrative project, a demonstration project of the NASA International Space Station National Demonstration Lab. Between the ISS National Lab, which embodies 21st century values of global cooperation and collaboration, it is a unique resource. It provides opportunities for youth to investigate significant real-world issues, to communicate with the inspiring ISS role models, and it includes scientists, engineers, astronauts, inventors, and it practices applying the 21st century global competencies our youth need to invent the future. 3 of the high schools, Dorsey High School, my alma mater in Los Angeles, and Sir Winston Churchill High School in Calgary, and Alberta, Canada, and the Academy of Information Technology in Stamford, Connecticut, are collaborating with corporate, government, and community-based partners to ensure youth are provided both with a robust science and technology learning environment and with the inquiry project based in their curriculum. The second pilot project relies on Broadband to establish a global sister site relationship between Fcc Learning Center, my other alma mater, in Los Angeles, and Oud Molen Technological High School in Cape Town, South Africa. And the schools and their core partners are collaborating to create students and teachers that have the ability to access resources around the world as they investigate and as they look at robotics and the global environment and report on it. So I just want you to know that we're on top of it through my office in my district. But we want to use these projects to go globally and internationally. And so the national broadband strategy will start affecting this global divide to ensure that all of our communities will have opportunities to link to international partners and to innovate and to see programs that really relate to their current educational environment and what's happening in the world. So what you're doing is essential to our future, and I thank you for this opportunity to be here this morning to express with pride what we are doing in our own schools in the 33rd, and I have to thank Ronnie Lowenstein for, she has antennae going out of her head in all directions. And so she picks up on everything. And we're working with NASA now out of the White House to improve and increase these programs and use the ones that we're developing in the 33rd as a national and international motto. So good luck in what you're doing, and thank you for having me here this morning. Much success. Yes, sir.
Okay. Congresswoman Watson has agreed to take a question or two, if there are any, from our audience.
Let me just say this. Historically, this inauguration that took place the first part of this year was recorded by our students from those schools that I mentioned to you, and they had an opportunity to bring in their video equipment and see history being made. What excitement among these young people. And what a joy it was to watch them as they went back to their home schools and talked about this unique experience. And so they're ready to face this future and to share it with the rest of their mates.
Great.
So I'm just so pleased that we've been part of that.
Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'd like now to turn to Brian David, who is from the FCC. He will be speaking briefly about the FCC's Omnibus Broadband initiative. He joined the FCC this summer as part of the leadership team for this Omnibus Broadband initiative and is responsible for the program on adoption and usage. And he oversees the portions of this broadband plan dealing with non-adopters of broadband. He also has extensive experience in business, and you can see it from the program, and also serves on the boards of AIM High School and the Full Circle Fund, both of San Francisco, and the National Leadership Council for the Emily Krzyzewski Center of Durham, North Carolina. So please welcome Brian David.
I won't tell Coach Krzyzewski that you mispronounced his name so poorly. That's all right. It's a little funny to be introduced by after 4 months in unelected office by a congresswoman and a former ambassador. So I'm a little humbled, but I'll try to talk about what I can talk about, and I'm going to try to be brief and leave some time for questions. To be, I expect that could be peppered a little bit. We're 71 days away. We've got a lot to do in that time, and I'm interested in a little bit more of a dialogue if that's possible. So I'll get into it. As Drew mentioned, I'm leading the adoption and usage team, which is one of the 3 core teams. I have also the sort of kitchen sink of other topics. Those that are not deployment and national purposes fall into my camp. Drew asked if I could address sort of 2 questions. In the eyes of the FCC, what is adoption and usage? And in a related topic, are they traditional digital divide issues or something else? So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to do it by describing our mandate and lay out a couple of frameworks that we're using to think about things. And then I'm not going to get into where we're going with recommendations, but I'm happy to have a Q&A on those types of topics and what we've learned. So let me back up to the mandate first. The mandate from Congress was achieving affordability and maximum utilization of broadband. So let me sort of break that apart. Affordability first. You know, with the budget being what it is, there are very limited tools to affect the long-term affordability of broadband. And so I think we're going to primarily focus, and this falls in the deployment world, on ways to lower the cost of inputs for providers. And so you've heard conversations in that realm. There are short-term, on the other hand, there are short-term ways to affect affordability. And we have a thesis that for many of the people who have access to broadband but haven't adopted it, that getting them over the short-term hump creates long-term retention in broadband, not for all, but for many. And so we're going to try to solve or address at least the short-term affordability problem to the best degree we can. That'll be an area of focus for us. So then the second part of the mandate was utilization, and we've actually chosen to break that apart into 2 different terms. Adoption, which is penetration, and usage, which is more about intensity of use. And the reason we broke it apart is because the tools you would use to affect each of those things are different. And the fact that one's sort of binary and one is more of a spectrum makes addressing them different enough that we wanted to break them apart. So, as is measuring them, by the way, which is a complexity, particularly when you get to usage. So let me place adoption and usage then in the context of the overall plan. From a framework standpoint, you may have heard Blair refer to, and the chairman referred to terms like unleashing underutilized assets. So that is one of the frameworks that we're trying to organize under in a project of this scope. If you don't organize under a few frameworks, it's very difficult to solve any problem effectively. So that is one. in that, the plan seeks to set up a dynamic where innovation in the ecosystem, which I appreciate the Congresswoman referring to, using the term. I know the one of the bar associations has a bet going on about how many times we'll use the word ecosystem in the next commission meeting. So, I appreciate that being used. More broadband leading to better outcomes in society, and that in turn setting the stage for more innovation in networks, devices, applications, and in consumers. But when we talk about underutilized assets, we typically think of, especially in broadband spectrum, fiber, rights-of-way, conduit, sort of hardcore physical assets. I want to put a different spin on that concept, and that is to say that one of the least utilized, most underutilized assets in the broadband ecosystem are the users of broadband. So let me sort of hang some context on that. 65% of households have access to broadband. Our survey is coming back this month, sort of generally reinforcing what all the historical research has said. We're seeing movement in different places, but still in the 65% range. If you take out the 5% who don't have access, who have no availability, that means 30% have not adopted, though they could. So you think about that from a private sector standpoint, that's a 50% increase nearly in your market if you can reach those folks. And in a fixed cost business, largely fixed cost business, a 50% increase in a market is likely to be a significant driver of innovation, whether it's in the network or in the application world or in the device world. And so as we're trying to create incentives for that innovation, we think the user and that 30% is at the center of doing that effectively. That's sort of the upside story, though. That's like motherhood and apple pie. It's the part of what we're doing that it's difficult to, I suppose, disagree with at a conceptual level. Where we get into religious debates is what I often hear, which is, that's fine, those 30% haven't adopted. We're not going to force them to. They've had the opportunity. From a policy standpoint, why does it matter? And so the case I'd like to make is that non-adoption is a problem. And it's a problem not only for the individual, but it's a problem for sort of the society at large and the country at large, and that does make it a policy issue. The reason it's a problem is that the cost of digital exclusion is significant and rising. We don't traditionally use the term digital divide in our work. We're trying to turn it to this cost of digital exclusion argument for a number of reasons, and let me talk about that. 10 years ago, when people began using the term more broadly, digital divide, the actual consequence of not being online wasn't all that significant. If you weren't online, it might be slightly more inconvenient to do whatever you needed to do, but ultimately you could go do it. In the last 10 years, in the last probably 5 years, what we're seeing is that across the economy, the number of options for offline activity have shrunk, and the online activity has increased, therefore the separation that one would experience if you're not online increases. So I'll give a couple of examples. We've talked about this before. In job search, a decade ago, looking for a job meant looking at ads in the newspapers, activating your sort of old school social networks, before LinkedIn, Facebook, MySpace, if you all use MySpace. That was a joke, sorry. Not really that funny, actually. In 2005, 77% of Fortune 500 companies who posted a job online only accepted an application for that job online. So you say, well, you can go to a library, you can go to a community center. Absolutely. The problem is that's not a solution to the problem. That is a partial solution to the problem, and it becomes it becomes a problem in itself when you have to get a ride, there's lines at the library, you know, you don't have enough privacy to do the things you're doing. So, that's job search. On education, homework is an online affair for students today. 71% of high school kids say the internet was a main source for a recent school project. You may have seen the article in the Post on Sunday, I think, spoke about the difficulty children have in keeping up with their peers, right, when they don't have access. And I found this quote heartbreaking in its clarity. The 11-year-old's mind whirls with the complicated and stressful options available to get her assignments done, since her family has no reliable internet service at home. She could work after classes in her Fairfax County School computer lab, but it's open just 2 days a week. The library has free computers, but time online is limited if it's busy. Finding rides is tough. The 11-year-old said, "I see my friends do their work, and I struggle to get the access I need. It makes me sad." You think, you know, this is an 11-year-old who's trying to succeed. And in the community she's in Fairfax County, simply not having broadband at home is fundamentally holding her back against her peers. Let me move off the softer stuff and talk about the economics of it. Many studies have calculated, I think Austin Goolsbee did one of the first studies, calculating the value gained by consumers by being able to transact online. Many of those estimates are in the billions. Even if those are off by an order of magnitude, there's significant value gained by those who can transact online, e-commerce, not to mention convenience and the like. Healthcare information, 61% of Americans have used the internet to get online, healthcare online, or information online, and most of those say it's influenced their decisions. You can tell the same story about newspapers. Shrinkage in reporter pools, shrinkage in actual print, and number of outlets in any local market. And where is that going? Most of that is going online. If you don't have internet access in a reliable way, you're no longer part of the news community, or it's more difficult to be part of the news community. So let me talk then about those are all about the individual, right? That's the pure economist would say, fine, but if the individual doesn't value those things, and therefore don't buy broadband, you know, what is it for us? So here it comes to part of the case from an economic standpoint. There's an equity case around the participation gap and the inability for those people to be part of working society. But there's also an efficiency in service delivery. So increasingly, government services are being provided online. We're not at the point where they're not being provided offline, but in many countries, that is what the shift has started that's what started to happen. And no one can argue that it's not more efficient to do some of these things online versus offline. Food stamps, DMV renewals, tax forms, permits and licenses, Medicaid, immigration services, human services, and emergency preparedness. These are the types of things that, if you think about who hasn't adopted broadband, those people over-index towards interactions with the government for government services. So do we not think that government service delivery can be improved, cost and efficiency, by having more of an online delivery method for some of these things? You can't take it away. You can't take the DMV itself away. People need to be able to go. But for those that are sort of ancillary services, why not? So I'll come back to my definition, and then I'm going to close. We would define adoption as broadband access at the home or for the individual. What that means is that libraries and community centers, critically important, are not what we're measuring and qualifying as broadband adoption. It certainly qualifies as access, it qualifies as important, but it's not about personal adoption where you can have it and use it in the mode that is convenient for the way your life organizes itself. Our goals with respect to adoption, We're at 65% now. I think you'll see a goal in the high 70s in 2015 or in that time period. And in the longer term, personal belief is that 88 to 90% is sort of a long-term target. I can't tell you whether long-term is 7 years or 17, but based on the math, the surveys we've done, the analysis we've done, the sort of indices of how people feel about broadband and what they use it for, that's sort of what the math is telling us. And it actually hangs together if you think that POTS penetration never got too much above 95%, and that was at a time when that was the only option. So I think high 80s, low 90s is probably a reasonable thing. We're also going to talk a lot about utilization. Congresswoman referred to digital literacy programs. We're going to talk a lot about digital literacy as a tool, as a solution to a critical barrier, which is two critical barriers, both skills and relevance of broadband. I think we're going to have some interesting things to say in that realm. We believe in that very much. So I'm going to give you two quotes. There can be no gainsaying about the fact that a great revolution is taking place in the world today. That is a technological revolution with the impact of automation and cybernation. Modern man, through scientific genius, has been able to dwarf distance. Through our genius, we've made this world a neighborhood. And yet we have not yet had the ethical commitment to make of it a brotherhood. But somehow and in some way, we have got to do this. I'll tell you who that was in a second. Another quote, "We are at a tipping point in relation to the online world. It is moving from conferring advantage on those who are with it to conferring active disadvantage on those who are without it." So it's a little daunting that the first quote was Martin Luther King in 1968, and the last quote was Digital Britain Report 9 months ago, because in essence they're arguing the same thing, which makes me say that maybe 71 days isn't quite enough. But unless the Congresswoman has any back channels to extend the deadline, I don't think we have more than 71 days. So I'll close with that, and I think there's a few minutes for questions, and very eager for input.
Thank you for being available for questions too, Brian. We'll do that for a few minutes, but he has agreed to stay for the entire time, so we'll have plenty of time and questions with our panel, so you can be around for that too. I'm actually going to pass this mic to you and then go mobile. Well, actually, if they're a little attached there, so if you're okay with it, I saw a hand right back here. If you could identify yourself.
Good morning. That was very helpful. John Kenny with Illuminate Group. I'm curious as to why we're not focusing more on the fact that penetration of cell phones among our young people is so strong, and that most of them are now being made with browsers and that, therefore access to the internet. Yep. Penetration being that high, why aren't we looking to that, as other nations have, as a major opportunity for adoption?
So, in boiling down 5 months of work into 7 minutes or whatever I delivered that in, some things get left out. We believe in that. That is part of the solution. The reality is that today and for the foreseeable future, it's difficult to apply for a job on your iPhone, even on your iPhone, right? It's easy you can read news, you can do a lot of those things, but some of the things that broadband delivers are still very difficult to either access over a mobile network or read or use on the UI that you have today. But mobile is, mobile is, I think Blair's talked enough about mobile and the need for spectrum, and there's no question that that is a critical aspect for us, and for certain communities, young kids being one of them, but the survey data suggests that African Americans and Hispanics over-index toward mobile adoption relative to at-home adoption. There are a lot of reasons for that. We're pausing to say, are those reasons all good, or are there reasons that that is the case that we can solve a different problem that underlies?
Great. Let's get a couple more here, and keep them brief, please.
Are you talking to me?
Hi, my name's Alyssa Clemson Roberts. I work with IBEC, and I just had a question for you about the 5% that does not have broadband.
Yep.
I guess I would argue pretty strongly that 5% is not accurate. I think you're missing quite a few people out there. But when you're talking the 5%, how did you come to that number? Mm-hmm. And what is the broadband speed you're using mm-hmm. to say 5% doesn't have it?
So that
Two-part, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the number is?
I would say more like 15%, probably.
And what are you using to define it?
I would use our rural area that we're currently serving. In the 5 co-ops that we are operational right now, 80% of the people do not have any option of broadband.
So no question that in that market, the number is higher than 5%. It is not evenly spread. The 5% is, and if it's 3 or if it's 8, there's a deployment, nationally it's not 10. It's, under almost any analysis that we've done or seen. Now, but in pockets, it's a very significant problem. Our job is to try to figure out how to solve that problem. That's fortunately not my job. That's the deployment team has their eyes focused on that problem.
Great.
I'm leaving satellite out of that, by the way.
What speed were you using?
Yeah, so we're going to talk in the plan, and I probably won't now, about the way we would define the sort of relevant speed. I know you'd like to hear it now, but once you start to we talked in the September meeting about building from the bottoms up. What do people actually do with their broadband access? And once you start to define it that way, as opposed to just picking a number, then you get to a level that I think gets you into the 5% range. But I wish I could say more. But
All right. I saw a question right here.
Peter Pitch from Intel.
Yep.
Applaud your work.
You haven't seen our work yet.
Well, so far. I may be grievously disappointed from here on. I don't know. But to what extent is the problem of non-adoption training? Mm-hmm. To what extent is it upfront cost? Mm-hmm. And what are the non-expensive ways to solve these problems if you don't have budget?
Yep. So the survey suggests that, and it corresponds with previous surveys, that the barriers remain, no surprise here, affordability, and that's actually the primary thing cited by those who say, I've just chosen not to buy broadband. And it's about evenly split between hardware and service in that. That is not a majority, but it's a plurality of the primary reasons. And then relevance and skills, which are related but not exactly the same thing, are pretty close to that in terms of importance. And then accessibility, and then there's a whole bunch of I don't knows, which we can't tease apart. Accessibility is really about people with disabilities primarily. Those are the primary barriers. The tools on affordability, there are some expensive ways to do it, which may not be available to the decision makers. I mean, we're putting a plan forward. We'll have recommendations. One of the things that is important to know is that someone else has to appropriate the money for the most part. The FCC doesn't have a significant budget to solve significant problems other than the things that it has today. Congresswoman and her colleagues will have to figure out how to prioritize certain things when it comes to a budget topic. there are public-private partnerships, which I think we're pushing pretty aggressively, that can solve some of the problem for some of the people. There have been announcements in the last week. NCTA made an announcement. There have been a number of other efforts with PC OEM manufacturers and people who do digital literacy in the field, trying to bring together efforts to solve the PC side of the problem, which for those who haven't adopted, about 50% don't have a PC at home. And so, you know, that's a significant issue. Some of those efforts don't require new money. Some of those efforts might. And what we're trying to figure out is how to balance those things. Digital literacy, it doesn't take a ton of money. I mean, there are people doing it and doing it well. There are ways that we can drive that conversation forward and perhaps create sort of a best practices orientation around that. And we have some ideas on a new type of digital literacy program that, you know, that could scale the solution. We have the opportunity to bring national support, vision, and maybe scale to what are an incredible array of local efforts. And that's the way we've organized the way we're thinking about this. This is not about us spending a ton of money to solve a problem. That's not to say there won't be some money asked for as part of this, but some of it we have to do, you know, within the confines of the types of programs that exist and bringing scale through national support to those.
Let's do two more just head-to-head so we can get to our panel. Okay, we'll see one here and then one in the back, and then we'll get an answer from Brian.
Thanks. Greg Goldman, Digital Impact Group in Philadelphia. Couple of other barriers that are out there, but one I think that particularly I haven't heard a lot of other folks talk about that we've uncovered in our work is the issue of credit and financing. It's not just a matter of affordability, but to pay for ongoing service, there really is a basic requirement around having a credit card, being able to pass a credit check, and things of this nature. And we've been playing around with ideas about how to engage the financing community as a partner in addressing that particular barrier, which we have found is actually much more significant than we realized originally. I thought you might comment on that.
Let's get one more comment in. We can do
Yeah,
both
sure.
at one time.
Go ahead and stand up. Good morning, Brian. Kerry Hinton with the D.C. Public Service Commission. One of the issues that you and I and my boss, Betty Ann Kane, the chairman of the commission, have talked about has been a lifeline program for broadband service. As you know, there's pending now congressional legislation to also address that. And my question is do you think that there will be recommendations along the lines of, not without asking you to be specific, but along the lines of making broadband services an eligible telecommunications service for lifeline support from the federal USF? And I might anecdotally note that in fact, was a recommendation of the Federal State Joint Board now 2 years ago. And clearly, not only my commission, but the states are still advocating that approach.
Thank you.
So I will answer that question by saying that there are a lot of people who have made that recommendation. Some of them on the Hill. And as you can imagine, the USF topic, to Peter's question around, you know, how are you going to do some of these things? The USF topic is one where the FCC has some jurisdiction over how to think about USF. So I suspect that will be fertile territory for some activity. I'm, of course, not going to tell you what it's going to say yet because I can't. I want to keep my job. Greg, to your question, transaction hurdles are a critical issue. It's not entirely clear to me, and that's partly because, well, we have some folks thinking about this. There's some catch-up I need to do, it's not entirely clear to me what we can say about transaction hurdles. There are good and bad reasons why some of those obstacles exist, whether it's something the service provider mandates or requires, or just an obstacle faced by a consumer who doesn't have a bank account and or a credit card. Solving those things gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. But I'm actually not I have not focused on that topic in the last, say, month or so. So it's a little unclear to me what we would do yet to solve that, or to recommend to solve that. Okay, that's great.
Well, let's thank Brian. He will be around for questions later. When you have an abundance of riches, sometimes we ask for the patience of our panel. So please come on up, all of you who are going to be on our panel. We have Robert Cornell of the Washington Island Electric Cooperative. You all have your bios in front of you. Please come on in and take a seat. We have Alan Inouye, who's the director of the Office of Information Technology Policy at the American Library Association. Bruce Lincoln is the entrepreneur in residence at Columbia University. And Karen Archer Perry, last but not least, she is the founder and president of CARICOM, but I understand she's just started off at the FCC. So we're very happy that all four of you can be with us. One question I wanted to start the discussion off with was, is the adoption and usage question the same as the question of bridging the digital divide? Or are we looking at two different problems here? Is the digital divide an issue that deals only with those individuals who have completely stayed off the internet? Or what do you, really I open it to all of us, think about this question of is adoption and bridging the digital divide the same issue, or are they separate issues? Go ahead, yeah, Alan, please.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So in terms of adoption versus digital divide, if you take Brian's definition of adoption, then I would say that they're radically different concepts. So adoption at homes as broadband subscribership obviously is an important goal that we all, advocate for. But the digital divide encompasses many more things than that. And those of us who work in libraries see it every day when people come in and, some people don't have very little experience or expertise using a computer or the internet, and they come in to apply for a job online or something like that. How to download files and how to edit files and how to attach files and use email. And there's a lot of things that people don't know that people in this room take for granted. So there's really a big difference between but adoption and everything beyond adoption. There's also long-term support. If you have a computer at home or wherever, how do you maintain that in the long run? So it's not just, getting a broadband subscription and buying a computer. Of course, maintaining the computer. There are many things beyond that.
No, that's great point of comparison. Kara.
Mercy.
Oh, Kara. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. People always say that the Eskimos have many different words for snow, and I'm glad we have more words to talk about the digital divide than we did 10 years ago. So we talk about the cost of digital exclusion. We talk about digital empowerment, digital excellence, digital opportunity. And I kind of think there's a shade difference in all of the language, but it's really, I think, just tools that we're using to be able to address the problem more directly.
That's good. Bruce, what's your perspective on this? Tell us a little bit about the work you've done in Digital Harlem.
Okay. Well, one of the things I want to say is that the digital divide is a result of what we can look at technically or structurally as differential development. I mean, just the nature of how we have to build out the internet means that there will be some places that have access and some places which do not. If we look at the digital divide, it has socioeconomic and sociocultural ramifications. But I think one of the things we need to look at as well is, and we address it in some of our projects, is the idea of, is there relevant content and applications and services which make sense for individuals who are now getting online? So this is all not driven by downloading videos and listening to music. There's very real human services that can be delivered over these networks. So I think that's just an added dimension to how we need to think about either adoption and use or the broadband digital divide. And there's some places where you have issues that are simply that of low density or geographical matters, such as the Mississippi Delta. But the issue with not having internet access is either it's there and it can ameliorate historical inequities, or if it's not there, it'll exacerbate historical inequities.
Good. Thank you.
I guess I can talk a little bit about bridging the digital divide because I live on an island. And I think when you talk about adoption and the digital divide, the bottom line is in order to adopt, in order to use the internet, you have to have access to it. And in the case of my home, which really sort of typifies rural America, broadband access is not readily available. There are certainly several options that can be used. They're not applicable to everybody, and we chose broadband over the power lines using IBEC in order to get the service to us. Again, we don't have a bridge to the island, but we do have a bridge to the internet now. We had some limited wireless that was available to us. Certainly satellite. A lot of those are terrain. Terrain can affect the ability for people to get that. But when I was a kid, you talk about adoption, it does go beyond. When I was a kid, our internet use was buying from the JCPenney catalog. And really the internet is maybe taking over that sort of a thing. So.
What's the buying pattern for a resident of Washington Island? I think when we spoke previously, you said you had about a third of your customers who have taken broadband. So I mean, I take it almost everyone's got power on the island, right? Yeah. So what kind of goes into the decision to make or not take broadband from you?
Well, I think it's an individual decision. I think it's first of all, whether they feel they have a use for the broadband. We have about 700 year-round residents. We've got 860 members of the cooperative, and there's 1,056 meters. Now that's residential year-round, residential seasonal, and commercial meters. So we've got about 270 takers. The broadband is accessible to everyone. So that's about a 30% if you look at just the membership. Probably one of the biggest factors in the cooperative deciding to go down this road was a number of things. And first of all, Washington Island is I got to put my tourist bureau hat on if anybody wants to visit. It is a beautiful place to visit. So, but
no bridge though.
There's no bridge. You have to take a boat to get there.
Okay.
So, but it's one of the things that economically Washington Island really has struggled with is we are largely tourism based, and we have a large seasonal resident population that has not typically had access to broadband. And one of the good things that this has done is we have quite a number of the subscribers who now are able to, instead of spending a weekend on the island, can spend a week because they can telecommute. That's great for the island's economy. Mm-hmm. And I think in rural America, I think that would be a fairly typical situation. I mean, we're a very pointed example of rural America because we're surrounded by water. But I guess that's the typical reasoning behind what we did.
Now, John Horrigan, who used to be the head of the Pew Internet and American Life Programs project on internet usage and measurement, and I believe he's now at the FCC working with Brian David, if I'm not mistaken. John has a term that we've talked about before, which is internet rejectors and just broadband non-adopters. In other words, he's slicing that number of people who have not adopted broadband between those who have internet and have dial-up, but for some reason haven't made the flip over to broadband, and the internet rejectors who, for some reason or another, have turned away from anything having to do with the internet. Does that distinction make sense in each of your experience?
One of the women that I work with in Akron, she says, you know what, I don't really know anybody who used to use broadband. You know, once you adopt, it's like, you know, water. You know, I'm not going to reject it once I become a user. I was on a panel with Susanna Fox from the Pew Center, and she pointed out that about half of the people who are not broadband adopters, you know, maybe haven't found the relevance. And I said, I thought the same thing, only for me the cup is half full. In every community that I go into to work, I find that about half the people who don't have broadband are dying to get it and just need a little help getting over the hump. Whether that's training, whether it's equipment, whether it's concern about the monthly service or the credit issue, half the people just are looking to get over the hump. Now, my experience in communities is that when you're starting to send me email on the island about when the softball game is, well, suddenly now I need it more. So I'm convinced that when you pick up the first half that's already ready to go, a good chunk of the second half is going to be ready to go as soon as that's done. Because it is a social network. It is about being able to communicate with people that you are social with and with applications. So I don't worry too much about those internet rejectors because I expect that that population will get smaller and smaller as more of us adopt.
Okay. Alan, what's your perspective on the library's role in kind of maybe educating people who might be internet rejectors about, there are protection mechanisms, there are, you know, the internet's not going to, you know, gobble you up. I mean, what's your perspective on librarians' role in that education process?
Well, it's actually a big part of what modern libraries do. When folks come in, I mean, some people come in because they want internet access and they know what they're doing, and their difficulty is that they don't have it at home, or what they have at home is just dial-up, or it's much slower, whatever they need. But other people come in not really looking for internet access per se, but because they have some purposeful goal in mind. They want to email their son who's now serving in Iraq. And this is actually a true story, a mother who has never used email or a computer before and now has a compelling need, so comes in to do that for communication or for some other purpose. I mean, libraries are places where we provide this kind of support and training. It's part of our goal. It's a, if you will, safe and comfortable place where we provide this kind of support.
Mm-hmm. Do you have statistics on the number of people who are using the internet because they don't have computers, i.e. they're coming to the computers, versus those who just boot up Wi-Fi because libraries have become havens of connectivity?
I'm sorry, say again?
Differences between the percentage of people using libraries' computers to access the internet and using the Wi-Fi networks that most libraries have today.
We have a number of statistics. I don't think we have that one in particular.
I'll tell you, that one's going to be really hard to track because you're going to miss me sitting in your parking lot. And I'm there.
Yeah.
Every time I go visit my mom, I go to the library to sit in the parking lot to use my computer, and you're not going to be able to count me. But I think that it's both. The libraries are really loaded with people. It's like our safety net for digital access right now.
Sure.
I will say that Wi-Fi, providing Wi-Fi access in public libraries is growing very rapidly. I mean, it is in double-digit rates per year.
Just as a little kind of commercial note of our own, our broadband census data side has a broadband technology opportunities program grant to measure connectivity speeds at libraries and other public computing centers throughout the country, just for your information. But Bruce, tell us a little bit more about your experience and what tips the balance for people in communities that are struggling to take full connectivity of broadband.
We found a couple things. One is, and this ties into the libraries, especially in rural communities, they really want to keep their library open and have internet access because they want the students there to be able to compete with the rest of the world. And they understand the importance of that. And that's from librarians to the parents. If you're looking at those people who are looking for work, they equate the internet to the means whereby they can locate a job. Now, one of the issues, however, say if you're, say, in rural Mississippi in the Delta, the jobs aren't necessarily there in the Delta. So what you have is historically a shift away from the agro-business, but agro-business is basically, you know, jobs where the people have to have very high-end skills. They have master's degrees in engineering and things such as that, because they're now running these, you know, cotton factories, but the historically undereducated population is just sitting there with nothing that matches up to their current level of just basic literacy or their ability to be employable.
Robert, when you look at the National Broadband Plan being constructed here, I mean, what are you looking or hoping for it to come out of it that would make a difference in your adoption rate, you know, to kind of get it closer to the national average of what we've heard, 65 or more %?
Well, I would have to agree that it's, I think it's going to be a natural thing that number is going to go down. I mean, I can speak, you know, for my
the number of non-adopters.
The number of non-adopters.
Yeah.
I mean, I can speak for my parents' generation. You know, my dad never laid a finger on a computer until he was 65 years old, and now he's on it every day.
Yeah.
So I think it's a matter of exposure and use in order for people to decide that they either need it or want it.
Yeah.
And there is a difference between, I think, need and want at a certain level.
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and open it up for questions from the audience, and you know, think of we'll have a chance for wrap-up comments too. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask our panelists concerning broadband adoption or their perspective on reaching out? Yeah.
Just in a way, in the library side of it, are you finding that the libraries are looking toward the broadband money out of either commerce or agriculture as a place to get access to you know, broadband development and, you know, public computing centers? Are you moving in that direction?
We're trying. As I suspect many in this room has done. I've devoted maybe the majority of my time in the past 8 months to NTIA and iOS and the FCC. And the American Library Association itself submitted 2 applications to BTOM. And we provided a lot of support to our community to try to encourage them to apply for PCC grants, as well as infrastructure and, in some cases, for SBA grants as well. So yeah, we definitely see that as an opportunity both to bolster capabilities within libraries, which is primarily within the PCC category, but also to bolster the infrastructure, especially in rural areas, so that libraries can avail of broadband access, because in some cases it's not available, or it's, you know, it's very expensive, or whatever. So having that build out really helps libraries and, of course, those communities in general.
Okay.
I'm Laura Breeden from the BTOP program at NTIA. In answer to the earlier question, yes, there are many proposals from libraries to upgrade their facilities and expand their public access computing services. But I wanted to ask you, because this is a problem that I thought about a lot the first time I was at NTIA, and I'm still thinking about, and that is the functional illiteracy rate in this country is very high. So perhaps 10 to 20% of adult Americans don't read English, or perhaps don't even speak English well enough to take advantage of the internet websites, the services that are available, which are primarily, as you know, text-based. I mean, now we have lots of other stuff, but still a lot of it is about text. So I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts about those connections between English language literacy and low adoption rates.
I can't say I've seen a program that solves that problem in a large-scale way that I find completely satisfactory. In Fairfax County, Virginia, one of the public school program that focused on bridging that gap. Who talked about Fairfax? Brian talked about Fairfax, where there's this huge immigrant population. They did a completely graphical digital literacy program so they could teach digital literacy to an immigrant group where you had many, many languages in the class. And I thought that was one innovative approach to digital literacy, but then it doesn't fully address the content issue. It helps people navigate to a select number of sites that might be relevant for their language or their level. In the work that I've been doing in Detroit, we've tried to align our community broadband initiatives up specifically with community safety and also with literacy efforts. And we're looking to partner with some of the local literacy programs that do have some basic online content. So the application is literacy. That would be the lead application combined with sustainable broadband adoption. I know that some of the stronger literacy programs in the country do have online components, and I think that can be a lead application, but I'm really not aware of really large scalable efforts that are already doing that. I kind of feel like we're still nipping at the edges on it.
Anyone else want to respond to that question?
I'll add something else. What we do is we work with those organizations, it's similar to what Karen talked about, that have a track record of being able to work with those populations and then ensuring that they have broadband. So that what we do is take their affective programming and then we augment it with broadband and whatever sort of supplementary or complementary applications would make sense. But I think what we need to think about, which I think has gotten lost, is how do we use broadband to stimulate new sorts of educational technology innovations that really address some of these seemingly intractable issues of lack of literacy.
Bruce, you're speaking, sure, when you're speaking about the project, which project are you speaking about that you're doing these things in? Is it?
We have a project, we have two projects. One is called Silicon Home and one is called Digital Mississippi.
Okay.
Both of those populations have similar issues when you look at long-standing issues of lack of literacy, not even digital literacy, and other sort of attendant human service needs. So what we're doing is doing this by solving it with consortia of those nonprofit human service organizations who have a track record. They've got the teachers, they have the social workers who can help these people reach a point of literacy where then they also then become comfortable with using computers, and then they can then move forward and become IT professionals or people who are doing document conversion. So we're not taking an online approach. We're basically saying, where are those organizations that really can do this work, and how do we basically enhance their ability to meet the needs of their clientele through broadband?
No, that's great. Great description. Karen.
I like to see it as three types of literacy. So there's the basic literacy, which is kind of an entry requirement to everything, and then digital literacy, which we talk about a lot. But the third type of literacy, which the Library Association has been great upon, is information literacy. And
what websites are scams? How you read? Is Wikipedia reliable or not? I mean, things like that kind of.
Yes. How do you know? Yeah, discerning good information from bad. And as more and more information becomes at our fingertips, it becomes a responsibility that we all increase our information literacy skills. I did focus groups with community college professors in LA as part of a project there, and I had these 6 community college presidents and CIOs in the room, and I was asking them about the preparedness of their students. And they initially said, they come in, they know they're really digitally savvy. And then one of the guys said, you know what, if you call updating your Facebook page and IMing your friend digitally savvy, they're completely there. But really, they need research skills. They need analytical skills. They need and they do not really come in digital savvy at that level. And I think we have a almost a false sense of information literacy in our population, because we're calling it all digital literacy. Right. And we're saying, just because you're so fast at loading that video up there, I'm thinking you really get this thing. Okay. But what is good information, what is bad information? And we need that to have a competitive society, which is why I thought the Congresswoman's comments about being able to get information online, evaluate it, comment it, expand from it. It really is a very broad spectrum of literacy skills.
Yeah. Got another question right here.
Greg Goldman again, Digital Impact. These are all awesome comments, and I wanted to pick up and expand on something specifically that Bruce said. We found through a variety of pilot programs that we've worked on with particularly the low-income population, that's particularly low literacy and low digital illiteracy, that even in the case of a lack of specific awareness of the relevance and a lack of ability to use the technology, that the ability to earn the technology, to earn it or to get it as an incentive is a powerful driver for participation in the types of programs that you're talking about. So you can structure it. We've done a variety of things where you structure. You can earn a computer and internet access for X period of time plus some support if you complete a employment and training program, or if you complete a literacy program, or if you complete a healthy moms and babies program, or whatever, whatever the particular objective of the particular program that you integrate the broadband adoption program into can be structured in such a way that even when folks don't have the technology literacy going in, they can be encouraged down that path if the program is structured properly. I just wanted to sort of throw that onto what you guys were saying.
I'd like to comment a little bit on the literacy part. I think it goes beyond the literacy. I think it also in our small community, we've got a school that has 72 kids in it from kindergarten through 12th grade. And necessarily, we're limited as to what we can offer those kids locally. So it's pretty important that things such as ITV, internet television, distance learning, and those things are available to those kids in order to expand what's available to them to move on in the future. It's more than just the 3 R's anymore. And I can speak. My son is taking a robotics course over ITV that would not be available without broadband access. So it goes beyond the literacy issue. It's actually a availability of information and expanding your horizons, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have a quick question? Okay. So we have 2 minutes left. So.
Hi, Andrew Feinberg with Broadband Census News. I have been wondering, there was some talk earlier about how the measurement of adoption isn't going to be isn't going to come from schools and libraries, and it's going to be focused more towards the home and getting broadband into the hands of individuals. And I'm wondering, what the thoughts are of you on the panel when some of you represent libraries and some of you represent rural broadband, and are you guys at loggerheads about that? Is that a point of contention, or do you agree that broadband should be measured by individual access, not just by where someone can go to get it?
I want to talk about a different way to think about this, because this is how I do this, because I build advanced networks. So we work from what's called the MERCI model, M-E-R-C-I, Metro Scale Regional Cyberspace Initiative model, where whether it's a city, where it's a metro scale network, or it's the Mississippi Delta, where it's a regional network, you're basically looking at solving the problem of the internet in a place. And then, of course, in those places, you have people, you have homes, you have businesses, you have nonprofits, you have folks running around with cell phones. So we address it in that regard, so that we're looking at how do you ultimately sort of either empower it on, the metro scale level, and in the instance of, say, a Harlem, it's a micro scale sort of deployment. And then in the Delta, it's a regional deployment. So we first address where the existing backbone connectivity, how do we then make sure it gets to the anchor institutions, and then how do we turn anchor institutions into the hubs for access for its programs, applications, and services. So it's a non-dichotomous model that we have. So it's not one or the other, it's both and.
I think it goes beyond just access. I think you have to look at what other things broadband brings to a community. It's not just internet. It's not just education. In our case, because of the route that we chose, we're actually able to utilize our network for smart grid technology. It really goes beyond, and I think that's going to be one of the justifications as far as you talked about underutilized capital. If you're able to do a multitude of things with your broadband access that goes beyond just somebody telecommuting or offering something from an education standpoint, or being able to shop online or update your Facebook account, I think that was one of the justifications that we used, is because not only is it, from a electrical service standpoint, because I have this network out there, I'm actually able to troubleshoot an outage much easier by accessing the network and seeing where the outage is rather than waiting for that telephone call that my lights are out. There's a lot more to look at, I think, than just internet access. I think that we should be looking at how that network can be utilized to serve other needs, not only in the community, but, so.
Please, Alan.
Sure. The FCC definition of adoption. So obviously, home adoption or subscribership is an important, very important measure, and the current number at 65%, and Brian suggested maybe we can get to 75% or something like that. So that leaves 25% out of over 300 million people, which is a non-trivial number of people. So I think another measure, in addition, is important to be wary of too, or that it requires attention and action. One of the things we're looking at in my office is the emergence of mobile devices and the expectation that people will want to access library services via mobile devices, which of course is true. I'm just kind of thinking back in terms of the prior comment on cell phones. And if we get to 75%, there will be a lot of people who will never have home access, perhaps. Or maybe we'll have to think of some other way to do that besides the conventional personal computer, because requiring people to have a conventional PC for home broadband access is a pretty high requirement. And so the obvious one is a cell phone or smart device or whatever, but maybe there are other solutions too.
Any final comments, Karen?
I'm going to quote Michael Calabrese from New America. He says that we'd like to have 100 megabits to everybody in the country, but we recognize that the first megabit is of more value and more use than the next 99. And this is not an issue of scarcity. I subscribe to at least 3 broadband services. I have fiber to my home, I have a wireless data card on my PC, and I have wireless broadband on my cell phone, and I use all 3 of them, and I do not feel like I'm too rich with bandwidth. I feel like that's what I need. So the question isn't how do we get a solution somewhere. The question is, the challenge for all of us is providing that digital connectivity and the skills for people to be able to participate where they are in those functions. And that becomes much more fundamental as we go forward.
Great. Before we thank our panelists, I just want to remind you all that after the new year, have a happy holiday and a great new year to everyone. We will be back in 2010 with our next Broadband Breakfast Club on Tuesday, January 12th. We'll be talking about setting the table for the National Broadband Plan education. And also, we're going to be having a special event separate and apart from the Broadband Breakfast Club on Tuesday, January 19th on the subject of net neutrality, copyright protection, and the National Broadband Plan Town Hall here at Clyde's of Gallery Place. So look for an announcement about that special event coming your way. And we also want to thank each of you for coming, making this venue and breakfast series useful to each of you. And of course, we want to thank our sponsors, International Broadband Electric Communications, the Telecommunications Industry Association, the Benton Foundation, and the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, and of course, our panelists. Thank you very much to each of you for being here, and please join me in thanking them.